So you're roaming around the internet, you're looking for answers, you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on, and you're confused, and then you run across this term. You know that what you do, you've heard of narcissists, you've heard of psychopaths, and you run across this term covert narcissist, and you start thinking, well, is that what I'm dealing with? Is that why I feel so confused? What the hell's going on here? So I'm going to tell you what the number one sign is for the possibility that you're dealing with covert narcissism. It's that. It's that. See what you're doing right now? Looking around on the internet, looking for answers? That is the number one sign that what you're dealing with is a covert narcissist. Let me help you. The term covert narcissist is very popular on YouTube. So we have this echo chamber on YouTube that's separate to the academic study in psychiatry and psychotherapy of narcissism. The term most commonly used that would be more helpful to use in psychiatry or psychotherapy is fragile narcissist or vulnerable narcissist. That's what a covert narcissist is. I don't favor the term covert narcissist because it implies that the behavior is covert. Well, all narcissistic behavior is deceptive, so all narcissistic behavior is covert. So that's the first level of confusion with the terms. The second level of confusion is you'd think, well, it's just a narcissist, but they're hiding in plain sight. No. Fragile or vulnerable narcissist? How do you know whether you're dealing with a fragile or vulnerable narcissist? You're confused. So the terms exist in opposition to the original term. So the original term, what we say on the internet, which is different to the published literature, is overt narcissist, because that's the opposite of a covert narcissist. In the literature, it is more usefully called a grandiose classic narcissist. Why classic? Well, it's classic in the sense of that's the way it used to be done in the literature, and it relates to classical mythology. It's a person who's fallen in love with their own reflection. That's the mythology of Narcissus. That's where Freud got the term narcissism from. It's Greek mythology. That's what Freud and Jung and dudes in that time, and dudettes in that time, they would use classical Greek mythology typically to talk about psychological machinations, personality disorders, concepts, right? But if you think, no, I'm only interested in fragile or vulnerable narcissism, then you'll be confused. Why? Your confusion, and you're looking around on the internet, and the fact that it's turned you into like this investigator, right? You're a detective, is because they switch. The classic or overt narcissist generally has one mode of being. They're a narcissist when they go to sleep. They're a narcissist when they wake up. They're always displaying the 9 traits from the DSM. They always have a false sense of self. They're always arrogant. They're always entitled. They're always going to lean towards being exploitative interpersonally, so on and so forth. The covert, now I want you to call them fragile or vulnerable narcissist, switches from being arrogant, full, in a state of narcissistic elation, feeling confident that they've won their sources of supply, and if they lose a source of supply, they'll gain more, to feeling very frightened and, according to the literature, hugely ashamed. Ashamed. It's a very shame-based personality disorder in totality, but the grandiose, classic, overt end of the spectrum, the shame is not so apparent as at the fragile or vulnerable end of the spectrum. So, number one way to know that you're dealing with a covert, fragile, vulnerable narcissist is that you're confused. The second way to know is that you see that they are ashamed and that they cycle through grandiosity. So they have this grandiose, classically grandiose false sense of self. This is who I am. I'm wonderful. I'm all powerful, all knowing, whatever, that they're very attached to. And then you'll see them flip, and they'll be sorry. They'll be apologetic. They'll be sad. They'll show that they are full of regret. They feel bad about the things that they've said and that they've done. And you'll think, well, this is not a classic narcissist, so this couldn't be a narcissist. No, it still is what you're dealing with. It's just that the fragile narcissist, their sense of self is fragile. The vulnerable narcissist, their sense of self is rooted in vulnerability. The classic way to know if it's covert or vulnerable narcissism is to see the signs of shame and see the signs of regret. So the grandiose, classic, overt narcissist, they will be fairly consistent with their moods. The covert or fragile will swing up and down, up and down, up and down. They'll be very dysregulated, and they will go from being incredibly pompous, incredibly arrogant, and that's them in their more psychopathic, strong protector state, deep into the false self, and then they'll drop out of it and they'll go, that's not really who I am, and they'll show up as a frightened, vulnerable child. That'll pull you back in. This will drive you completely bonkers, because it's like you're dealing with two completely different people, and you'll be looking, you go, but they said sorry, they've displayed genuine regret, and now they're showing up as a vulnerable child. They're showing up as an abandoned childlike victim who just needs to be loved and made to feel secure, and then I can save them. And that sucks you back in. A classic narcissist, an overt, grandiose narcissist, is a walk in the park compared to the covert narcissist, just because of this cycling. So you go, oh, they've gone from predator to prey. Oh, well, it's like the gremlins, right? They're so cute when they're like mogwai, but then when you feed them after midnight, they turn into demons, and they instead of being like nice fluffy little mammals, they turn into these bat-wing-eared, slime-covered reptiles that just do damage. That's the conversion. That's the thing that you want to be worried about. And it's not that they're constantly bat-winged demons with big ears causing mayhem, because if they were, you'd be like, well, I'll just stay away from them. That is what they are, and I'll leave them alone. But when they keep switching back into cute, big-eyed, baby Yoda-style mogwai looking so cuddly, you're drawn back in. So you end up being trauma bonded far faster by the vulnerable, covert narcissist than you would with a classic grandiose narcissist. So the number one way to know is your confusion. The second thing is you want to look for that shame. And the third thing is you want to see them cycling. You want to see them switching. So it's almost like dealing with a dissociative identity disorder. And you'd be like, okay, which version of them am I dealing with today? It's far closer in the cluster of traits to a malignant, borderline way of manifesting as a personality disorder than it is to the classic grandiose narcissist. My phrase that I use that has helped people over the years is this: the overt, grandiose narcissist thinks that they are wonderful, and generally speaking, they can get most people to agree with them most of the time. They think they're special, they think they're deserving of special treatment, they're super entitled, and most of the people around them agree most of the time. The covert or vulnerable narcissist really thinks that they're special, really does believe they're entitled to better treatment, but they can't get people to agree with them most of the time. So they're constantly in degenerating narcissistic supply. One is a heroin addict who knows, like the classic grandiose narcissist, they're a heroin addict, but they know they have the world's best supply of heroin. It's not going anywhere. They're very confident. What's the heroin? Narcissistic supply. What's that? Attention and subservience from other people. Why could they be so sure of that? Well, if they are very gifted, if they're very beautiful, if they're very rich, if they're very intelligent, if they're very powerful, they know that people are going to keep giving them narcissistic supply. So they feel very, very secure in that, so they can afford to be a dickhead all the time. And it's like, I don't need to switch. There's no reason for me to switch. The covert or vulnerable narcissist is like a junkie who knows that they can only get little bits of low-level heroin here and there, and they're constantly in anxiety about where they're going to source the next tip from. And you may have seen that. You may have seen them hyper-vigilantly, panickingly, anxiously looking for the next source, for the next, who can I hook into next to squeeze that tiny little bit of narcissistic supply from. So the covert or vulnerable narcissist does think that they're wonderful, but generally they can't get the world to agree with them. So their mindset will be like, I really am a genius, I really am wonderful, but the rest of the world is too stupid to realize how wonderful I am. I really am a genius, I really am wonderful, And instead of thinking everybody's stupid, they'll play the biggest victim in the room. They'll be like the victim narcissist. They'll be like, well, I am wonderful, I am great. If it wasn't for those damn insert target group here, if it wasn't for those damn target group, I would be as rich and famous, as adored as I deserve to be. So there's my, I think that we're now on to the fifth little clue there. If you've heard those phrases coming out of their mouths, or that attitude rather than phrase. Well, you'll hear the phrase, but it's more an attitude, it's a stance, it's a way of being. I'm a misunderstood genius. I'm owed great wealth and great riches. If it wasn't for the government of such and such a country, this target group, that target group, and it can change. They can, because they live in a fantasy land. So the target group will shift and move as the days, weeks, months go by, as their fantasy of their persecution goes by. Remember, when people are fantasizing about being persecuted, it's highly narcissistic. These are called ideas of reference. Ideas of reference, if you're afflicted with ideas of reference, you think everything is all about you all the time, which is pure narcissism. Paranoics are narcissists because they think it's the CIA is trying to get me because I'm so important that I'm worth getting, right? So the next question that you will be asking is, how do I know it's not me? Well, if that's a great sign that you're with a covert or vulnerable narcissist, because nobody who's with a classic or grandiose narcissist ever says, I wonder if it's me. You'll be like, no, it's clearly them. So the big problem, and what causes most people to look through YouTube as you've done, or to look online, the big problem for most people is the covert, because they confuse you. It's an extremely confusing relationship to be inside of, way more destructive than being with a classic or grandiose narcissist, because you never know what you're dealing with. And when you face that much confusion over a long enough period of time, whether that person is your boss, so you're dependent on them for money, or that person is your lover, so that you're dependent on them for attachment and love and whatever financial, emotional time commitment you've made with that person, you're going to be experiencing a sense that maybe it is you. So if you're confused and you're paranoid that it might be you, I would say these are two huge signs that what you're dealing with is a covert or vulnerable narcissist, because that's how they will make you feel. You know there's a problem. You can't quite pin it on them. You're not sure whether it's them or you. Most likely, where obviously I can't diagnose, neither can you, neither you nor I as a clinician, but that's the area I would be looking at. This is probably vulnerable or covert narcissism. How do you know that you're not? Well, you're here asking the question. And if you're here asking the question, then you're not doing what they're doing, because the narcissist, be they overt, covert, alpha, beta, omega, whatever you like, with chips, with rice, or just with broccoli today, please, they'll never be wondering whether it's them. They'll never be taking that responsibility, because the core of the personality disorder is still narcissism. So it couldn't possibly be their fault. It's you're to blame. So even with the covert narcissist, the vulnerable narcissist, for all their vulnerability, for all their fragility, they're never saying, maybe there's something that I need to change about myself to improve this relationship. It's still always your fault. Don't get it twisted. They're still narcissists. It's just that they can go through a cycle of narcissistic elation, and then they'll go through narcissistic depletion. Narcissistic elation is when the supply is very high, and then narcissistic depletion when the supply becomes low, and they will feel bad. And you'll think, oh, they're vulnerable. This is the vulnerable side that the guy on YouTube mentioned. No, they only feel bad because their supply went down. They're only crying because they got caught. They're only crying and acting vulnerable and apologizing because they're terrified their source of supply will leave. Their source of supply is you. So if you're wondering if it's you, that means it's not you. If you're very confused, that means it's probably vulnerable or fragile or covert narcissism. Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers. If you enjoyed that video, please check out this video over here on the left. Below you will see a link to a free PDF, and over here on the right you can subscribe to my channel to get all future updates immediately. Thank you.